Silly girl, stop playing with spider webs. These were the first words that registered in Kimarya's mind as she shook her head from left to right, trying to clear the jumbled mess that were her thoughts. Eventually, her vision cleared, and she focused on her surroundings. She felt her back pressing against something solid, which she guessed was a tree based on the ominous presence of a dark and humid forest all around her. These details immediately alarmed her, as the last thing she remembered was being in a city. "Where am I?" she wondered. She moved her arm to brush something that was all over her face and realized it was long and wavy hair. When this registered in her head, she stopped moving for a moment in shock before firmly tugging on it again and feeling a stinging pain. Kimarya, in her exasperation, said, "What's with this long curly hair? I have a little fro. My hair is not supposed to be this long." In that moment, pulling on her hair seemed to trigger something, as a massive rush of information violently exploded in her head, almost causing her to pass out from the overwhelming pain. It felt like her head was going to explode. Subconscious initiating floodgates safeguard. Kimarya, a massive amount of new information has been discovered, a lot of it being a foreign language, culture, details, memories, thoughts, and beliefs. Something forcefully assimilated some of it before protocols fully kicked in. How do you want to proceed? Kimarya stayed completely still as the splitting headache died down. We appear to be in an unknown and likely hostile environment. How would you like to proceed? Kimarya replied, "Sunny, please scan through all the assimilated information, prioritize information on potential threats and safety, then organize the rest of it in a new folder. Categorize it so we can look through it later on." Sunny, understood. I have detected an undetermined amount of new biological factors in the host body. 300, 2,000, 16,000 unknown factors. Starting emergency full-body cellular scan to determine functions and interactions of these factors. Kimarya sat in silence as she held onto her hair before realizing what Sunny said and urgently investing more attention in her body. She immediately noticed some differences and inspected herself with much more urgency. She initially thought that this body was smaller in relation to her old one, before realizing that the woods and everything around her were vastly larger than she had ever experienced, likely enough to put the evergreens to shame. "What's going on?" Kimarya, alarmed, asked. Kimarya, with her back pressed against a massive tree whose elastic, paw-like bark gave way under her touch. She was disoriented and confused, her thoughts a jumbled mess as she tried to make sense of her new surroundings. She looked down at her hands, noticing the dark red hue of her skin and the absence of her tattoos and body mods. This was a completely different body, one that was smaller and more agile than her old one. She walked on shaky feet, trying to get a bearing on where she was and how she had gotten here. As she examined her body, she realized she was wearing crude clothing made of animal skins and odd fabrics, but with incredible stitchwork. She felt a surge of panic as she remembered the last thing she could recall, being in a city, not a dense and dangerous forest. "Sunny, what's going on?" Kimarya asked, her voice tinged with alarm. "Sunny, Kimarya, after scanning through your memories and the new information, my general conclusion is that you died in your sleep of a heart attack and other odd complications, and have been reborn in the body of this person. This body differs vastly from the standard range of a human being, starting with slightly different organs, but with similar functions. There are even new ones that don't exist in the usual human body. The vitality of this body is tremendous. The muscle density and structure are unlike anything in my database. Sunny, gravity and multiple environmental conditions differ completely from Earth, which is the reason I couldn't add numerical figures to the stats of this body. It's safe to assume we are in a different world. Sunny. Name, 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶, age, 13 years old, sex, female, health, unknown status, but healthy. Kimarya's mind reeled at the flood of information. "All of that sounds insane," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "How is this at all possible? 13 years old? What happened to 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶, the host of this body?" Sunny. Regarding the host, it seems she also died from an unknown toxin, likely from the environment. The likely source is the odd tree-like organism you were leaning against, based on the information scanned. I recommend creating more space between it and yourself. Kimarya stood up even straighter and added more distance between her and the odd tree, brushing off the back of her clothes frantically. Sunny, looking at the memories, it seems that she was on the autism spectrum. Unfortunately, her tribe and culture made her incompatible, so she didn't have a great time. In fact, the reason she was out here was because of a tradition of her people where some 13-year-olds go out into the sacred woods to find an ancestral spirit guardian or never come back. Based on the dangers and creatures out here, the more likely scenario is death. It's a sort of coming-of-age ritual to better describe it. Kimarya wondered out loud, "Death from what? Are there more of those toxic mushroom trees?" Sunny, "It's actually a gigantic variation of mushroom. But Kimarya, there seems to be a massive ecosystem of dangerous and extremely powerful creatures all around. Apparently, with the coming-of-age ritual, there is a special method to accept an ancestral spirit guardian. The inhabitants of this world possess an astounding growing potential to increase their power. It's known as martial cultivation, where they strive for power and something extremely similar to Taoism. To simplify the core components of this concept, cultivation is the stride forward, and the Tao is the guide. Your personal mountain path to apotheosis, the peak. The recommendation for right now is to get back to the village and try your luck, or try to form the ancestral spirit guardianship. The latter would undoubtedly be more dangerous and most likely lead to death if its lineage doesn't accept you, but banishment from the village for not doing so would be assured if we return now without it, assuming that we make it back." Her body started shaking. Goosebumps formed on her skin as she grew serious as well as rightfully scared. Kimarya stood in the dark and humid forest, her thoughts in turmoil as she tried to decide what to do. On the one hand, she could return to the village and risk banishment from people she had no emotional attachment to. On the other hand, she could follow the insane rite of the coming-of-age tradition and most likely die in the process. She knew she had already died once, and she wasn't eager to repeat the experience. She weighed her options carefully, trying to find a solution that would keep her safe and give her the opportunity to explore this strange and exotic world. Finally, she made her decision. "Sunny, I don't know what to make of this world, but I'm not willing to risk my life on such low chances of survival. Take me back to the village." With a sense of resolve, she began walking through the forest, her eyes scanning the trees and underbrush for any sign of danger. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder at the strange and exotic plants and animals that surrounded her. She had never seen anything like them before, and she couldn't wait to learn more about this new world and all it had to offer. Kimarya was a decisive person, always sticking to her choices regardless of whether they were sound or completely irrational. When she made a decision, she fully committed to it, viewing failure due to poor planning as far more tolerable than failure due to hesitation or second thoughts. This unwavering commitment had steeled her will over the years, making her even more decisive. As she made her way through the dense and humid forest, following the directions Sunny had given her, she called out, "Sunny, tell me—" "Sunny, sorry to interrupt, but walking back at night has too many significant risks. The tree on your right seems to be the most suitable rest stop for the night. Let's head there before making a plan of action." Kimarya nodded in agreement, understanding that attempting too much in a new and uncertain environment was a recipe for disaster. She picked up her pace, moving towards the tree Sunny had indicated. As she climbed to a considerable height in the massive tree and nestled into a secure spot between its branches, she asked, "Sunny, what would you consider our most important goals?" "Sunny, priority-wise, we should focus on updating our understanding of this new body, surviving the trip back to the village, concealing the body swap, and understanding village politics." Kimarya sighed and said, "Might as well start in that order, Sunny. I'm glad to have you with me through all of this." Sunny, beginning with the detailed body update, you're roughly 2.13 meters tall. As I mentioned earlier, your new muscle density is extremely dense, and you have a unique cellular structure that reduces weight while also increasing the efficiency of both slow and fast-twitch muscle fibers. You have various new organs, some of which seem to be redundant in that they support and overly strengthen your immune system and other bodily functions. This body likely has absurdly strong resistances to sicknesses, diseases, toxins, radiation, and so on. The toxins of that mushroom-like tree must be on a whole other level to have taken the life of the previous host of this body. Episode 3. The most astounding thing is an almost perverse level of vitality. It's robust enough to comfortably sustain several upgrades of myself with computing strength, sensing capabilities, and management of bodily functions as your subconscious. There is also an extremely bizarre amalgamation within your body overlaying all your organs. It's a combination of electromagnetic radiation and an unknown energy, densely packed within the body and tied to your life force, brain, nerves, and even deeper. I don't quite have the capabilities to scan deeper and see the full extent, but I can only describe it as a subtle organ, maybe even a secondary body that is complementary to your physical one, essentially a whole new organ system. Understand it as what allows you to cultivate. Kimarya interrupted and asked, "Cultivate what? What is cultivation? Is it like what I've read in Oriental stories of ancient monks attaining power through meditation, martial arts, and analyzing the laws of the universe?" Sunny. Precisely, such a capability is verifiably existing within you. There was no evidence of this in our past world. Currently, I will need some downtime to upgrade my functions and capacity. It would be best to not do something so intensive, such as cultivating, until after safely reaching the village. Sunny. It seems to be similar in the sense that cultivation involves training and discipline in order to increase one's power and understanding of the world around them. However, the specifics of cultivation in this new world are unclear at this time. It may involve meditation and martial arts, but it could also involve other methods or practices. We will need to gather more information before we can fully understand the concept of cultivation in this world. Something I can do now is to assimilate the current remnants of the subconscious of the host body into myself to induce a more harmonic balance within this system, as well as a quick jump in our processing powers, giving me an enormous increase in proficiency while doing multiple tasks and memory capacity. I will start after you sleep. Another big thing I've noticed, the host body's survival instincts are disturbingly unfathomable, to degrees I considered having been impossible. After going through the memories, I came to understand that they had the potential and talent as a sort of ultimate, instinctual fighter. Many in the village referred to her as supreme warrior without a soul after several clashes with other kids. They value the fighting, but her behavior from being on the spectrum made her out to be the embarrassment of the clan. Common knowledge of the autism spectrum here is almost non-existent. Likely, the previous host just couldn't make the necessary connections with cultivation and was stuck within her head. They were seen as a joke. The village considered this as a punishment from the gods. She had instincts that no one could not compare to, but she couldn't or wouldn't cultivate. Giving such a gift from the heavens onto the body of a fool without a soul was something many said about her. It truly was such a cruel misunderstanding. Kimarya couldn't help letting loose another sigh. She felt her rage bubbling up, feeling a smoldering fire inside of her. This tragic situation resonated within her heart. Maybe also the last and faint vestiges of the ego of the previous owner of their body. Maybe the stirring of these feelings was its hope in the changing of their fate. Don't worry, Drenoi. Wherever your soul has gone in the afterlife, find peace in that. I will gain you the dignity and acknowledgement you deserved. Sunny, you can begin the integration of her memories with mine. We've both been dealt a heavy hand. I really died. It isn't the time to be hesitant about taking in these memories, said Kimarya with a hard look in her eyes and a warm and confident smile. Sunny understood. Well done, Kimarya. Beginning integration of memories. There was darkness. Kimarya saw the flashing of images and moments that were alien to her. A younger Drenoi not interacting with other children who were running around their village. She realized that calling it a village was wrong, more like a small or medium-sized city. The people had truly bizarre and considerably brutal customs, homes built without a roof, multiple levels, but with long poles through one wall to another. They didn't even have ladders or stairs, and just jumped to the higher levels. Their construction was wholly inconsiderate of those differently abled. You either had a highly athletic range of motion, or you were filth. She remembers her mother Grauthi was always distantly caring for her, but even then it was rough at times. Occasional hugs and bonding, but intense moments of one-sided bouts. The intensity of this rough treatment grew with every few months. Episode 4. Kimarya always saw Drenoi, not understanding how a peaceful moment could turn to intense pain. How her mom went from one moment hugging her and helping her to a higher level of their home, then going away. Then later on, after helping her onto the third level, but suddenly pushing her. Drenoi was very good at maintaining her balance, but she always fell off in those moments where she was pushed by her mom. She always maintained total trust in her, where she didn't even force out any counter-resistance to the touch of her mother, and easily fell off the other side onto a hard pole that she had to grab on, lest she face a long fall to the ground. Or other times, her mother, after handing her a new fruit, bursts out with a jab towards her and striking her shoulder. A blow that sent her tumbling into the expanse from the second or third level of the home. Luckily, she could always catch on to something to stop her fall. She seemed to always feel distress, never understanding the seemingly random aggression. Never capable of making the connection that it was a form of training, some brutal semblance of nurture. She barely could express her feelings of trust and affection to her parents. This factor already made it so much harder. Kimarya, after seeing these memories, understood that it's a custom from many generations ago. It's so normal, it's even seen as a correct way of showing affection to the young. A caring parent works hard in preparing their young. Even a normal interaction with friends, family, and lovers, they seamlessly tie in acts of combat. Because of Drenioy not catching that connection, she couldn't associate with something universally crucial to everyone around her. It was their culture. A clan with such brutal customs for survival that their young, if born with any disability, were discarded by their family. It became a point of frustration for her parents, especially after noticing something bizarre in her after her birth. Shortly an hour after being born, she already tracked objects and people with her eyes. Able to raise her head and chest when on her stomach, responding to smiles whenever one of them smiled at her, griping objects and bringing them to her mouth. These were things that their people should have only been able to do within a month of being born. At a week after being born, she could already reach out and manipulate things in the areas around her. She could even crawl or roll around to get to places, something that made taking care of her a bigger task for her parents, especially considering the structure of homes. She was capable of sitting up and superb control of her head by turning it in response to noises and being able to follow and track sounds. A month later, she had completely dominated the skill of crawling and could already stand to increase her access to new objects and things for her to manipulate. They observed such incredible growth in their child and were astounded but extremely overjoyed with the coming months and her development advancing at an enormous rate. She grew as a strong, healthy child, till they realized she hadn't yet talked, even though she understood language and commands very well. She just never made an attempt at communication. She had a habit of looking at everything and always observing. At home, there was always a particular corner of cobwebs that always drew her attention the most. She spent hours daily observing the old cobwebs and new ones that those spiders made. She would even draw them out on sand or paper whenever her parents let her use it. It was her only focus, and happened enough for her mother Grothy to constantly tell her to stop making spider webs. Silly girl. Kimarya couldn't help but feel pain along with Drenioy, words that always intensely bothered the nonverbal and non-communicative girl. She always ended up drawing these patterns more and more intensely, and hiding more and more inside of herself. Kimarya often heard her parents saying she has the uncommonly powerful instincts and body that only pop up in their village every 100 and sometimes 1,000 years. How it feels like she has no soul. Her defensive instincts are unmatched, but it rarely goes past that she only defends. We've been trying to prepare her for the coming of age event that is mandatory for all the children of royal candidate families when they turn 13, to either come back with a guardian spirit, die, or return to be banished from their clan forever. Kimarya woke to the roar of Sunny in her head, screaming of danger. Sunny, Kimarya, wake up right now! Kimarya woke up to her body roughly slamming down onto a branch and heard a crash immediately followed by a loud cracking sound right above her. She awoke dazed and in shock. She felt such a terrible presence with an intense killing intent that made her body shiver. But her body kept moving on its own. Kimarya, wake up right now! Kimarya woke up to her body roughly slamming down onto a branch and heard a crash immediately followed by a loud cracking sound right above her. She awoke dazed and in shock. She felt such a terrible presence with an intense killing intent that made her body shiver. But her body kept moving on its own. Sunny had control and was escaping something that was in the air by diving headfirst to lower branches. She felt highly disturbed by this feeling and easily got control again. But because of that, she missed a branch and tumbled down with no control. She looked up and saw that branch that she missed getting impaled by 6 black 2-foot-long objects, and realized she almost got nailed to that tree as an easy meal for whatever was chasing her. Kimarya shouted in her mind, "Sunny, what's chasing me? Asterisk, asterisk, Sunny, asterisk, asterisk, jump now!" Her body took control. It wasn't her, nor Sunny, but still something mysteriously compelled her body to move. She crouched and sprang forward like a cannonball, right between two thick branches and into the empty abyss. Immediately after, she heard a thunderous cracking sound. She sensed a large body crash with great momentum behind her and onto the branches that she just dived through. Something enormous that was only just barely slower than her forceful dive downwards into empty air. Actually, it wasn't any slower, but faster. It wasn't expecting her speed to be so fast and merely struck down where its prey should have been. This existence was a hunter, yet not a hunter. This was a strikingly intelligent and brutal creature that had no care if its meal had long stopped breathing with the miasma of rot, or if it still labored to do so as it fed on it while it lived. Kimarya had the sinking impression that it was often the latter. Her panicked mind and memories of this body told her this was a murder crow. The murder crow opened its maw, and it unleashed a terrifying cacophony of sounds that Kimarya had never heard. A combination of sounds that didn't seem possible to come from a living creature. She had the impression that it sounded like the death throes of dozens of people, hundreds of creatures, even the thunderous cracking of a tree as it collapsed under its own weight. I could hear these noises within this dreadful call. All of those cries were really in the background of its genuine caw that, if the rest made your goosebumps and hair raise from the message of fatality within it, this caw would be the final straw that broke the camel's back. A sound so terrible that contained a fatal message that said, I am the reaper that caused all of these noises, and you'll be the next one to join in my orchestra of death. She didn't notice, or she couldn't notice the nearby tree branch from a nearby tree quickly coming into reach, but her instincts did and grabbed on forcefully. Her hands gripped hard onto the rough bark to counter her incredible momentum that was strong enough to leave her palms with no more external skin. Kimarya didn't feel any of that. All she could focus on was that call, as it finally made her mind buckle. The innocence of Drenioi and the past life of Kimarya, whose most dangerous encounters were the smog of her city, nearly being hit by a car a few times, or the several fights she had as a teenager. None of that could compare to this moment of absolute horror. None of that got anywhere near to preparing her for this moment. This was too much for her as a full-blown panic attack was building up where she'd likely let go of the branch and surely be the next cry added in the crow's note, or maybe panicked and maniacal laughter that she heard in between the majority governed by screams and cries. Asterisk zzz! Asterisk electricity ran through her nerves, tightening her grip on the branch as she instantly pulled herself up and kicked off seconds before the branch she was on was shredded by the fearsome talons of the murder crow. She felt small, stabbing pains on her back as the furious splinters reached her. The boiling adrenaline rampaging through her veins swallowed up her full-blown panic attack as she masterfully glided like an Olympic acrobat between branches, heading deeper into the tree where branches grew thicker and more densely packed together. She crouched as she slid between 4 massive branches, each as thick as her waist. She looked back again and saw the murder crow angrily caw at her before fiercely grabbing the branch with its vicious beak, pulling on it before violently crunching right through it. It continued towards her. For every step it would violently bite down, jerk its head, and the loud crunching of the branch sounded off as it got closer to her. Kimarya noticed the space between the thick branches getting smaller and smaller, so she immediately ditched this direction before she eventually and foolishly got stuck in between these branches and become an easy meal to that monster. She screamed in her mind, "Sonny, what do I do? Where do I go?" before jumping and diving to a tree nearby. The murder crow's eyes glinted with intelligence. Its fake outrage didn't trick its little snack into trapping itself like its other, less interesting meals. It silently jumped into the air once more to continue its chase. Kimarya swung through branches, kicking off at random times. Her decisions seemed to be random, seemingly lacking whim or reason. But every time she made those calls, she would hear the thundering crash of the murder crow pouncing on where she should have been. This went on 6 more times, but then she was not hearing the resounding crash of the murder crow, who began to strike less frequently. For some reason, this didn't make her feel any bit safer, as she tried to increase the randomness and directions as Sunny furiously scanned and pointed out all available paths she went through looking for the best escape route. Asterisk, asterisk, Sunny, asterisk, asterisk, Kimarya. Right over there, there's a gorge between those trees. That might be a path the water takes during a storm rush as it cuts through the land. Kimarya made sure not to make a direct beeline towards the gorge. She had the sinking feeling the murder crow was much smarter than it appeared. She kicked off of the branch, before feeling the intense pressure in her heart warning her of intense danger. The murder crow attacked as she was in mid-air. She heard snapping branches above her as she realized this and swung her arms and roughly caught onto a branch that stopped her mad dive forward. This tactic was not without its consequences. She felt like she nearly popped both arms out of her shoulders before a millisecond later, a massive shadow covering up her entire vision crashed through the area she would be at if she continued her dive forward in the air. Her heart beat extremely loudly, as if she just saw her own death before she dropped onto the ground and madly rushed towards the gorge less than 30 feet away. "I'm going to make it!" Asterisk, asterisk, Sunny, asterisk, asterisk. "It's too easy! Think of a better way, fast!" Kimarya stopped suddenly. At that moment, she heard shrill whistling noises and saw two sharp, 2-foot-long black pole-like objects impale the ground where she would have been if she didn't stop then and there. She immediately felt a cold sensation on the back of her neck. This feeling reached all the way down her spine before she dived behind the nearest tree on her right. The unnervingly shrill whistling noise was quickly followed by the sound of the tree on her back being stabbed into by more dark objects. She got up and dashed between and around trees as she made a slightly longer but safer route, using as many obstacles as possible against that flying beast. She was within 5 meters of the gorge, and the long, dark, and sharp objects kept reaching closer and closer to their mark. 4 meters away from the gorge before it nicked her left thigh, causing a stinging gash that wasn't particularly deep. Something not able to slow her down just yet, but it still increased the pressure on her, and the wound still started bubbling out in scarlet blood. She considered stopping and faking moves, but she felt it would not work. She had a feeling it really would just land on top of her and feed, so she just lowered her head and ran even faster, making sure to not run in a straight line. She got within 2 meters of the gorge before she noticed the ranged attacks were less and less frequent till they seemingly stopped. But by that time she had over 10 cuts all over her body. Some small, others way bigger. All she could smell was the scent of her blood. If anyone saw her at this moment, they would think she fell in a vat of red paint. Hardly any spot on her body was without scarlet red. Just then, she heard the murder crow's horrifying call above her. Her head grew fuzzy and heavy as fear and panic started building up right away. Kimarya felt like she was running through water as the pressure built up inside of her head, every moment becoming heavier and heavier till she felt her knees and neck could not bear the weight. She heard Sunny's voice yelling something to her, but it sounded so far away that she couldn't understand. She could only look up as she saw the murder crow hovering, its massive wingspan blotting the sky and making the winds go wild, and its ephemeral azure eyes where its head should be as it took its time to land, its piercingly blue eyes focusing and looking into hers. She felt such pressure outside of her as well as within. Fear, terror, and a panic was rising to its peak inside of her, waiting for the first vicious peck to finally come bursting out in a dreadful scream of pure and absolute fear originating from both her instincts, and Sunny. She saw some movement in her peripheral vision before a body suddenly tackled her hard into the ground. She fully expected to hear and feel the tearing of her flesh, but saw it was a young boy. This boy seemed to be 13 years old. He had long black hair with patches of brown in random places, earrings on the top part of his left ear. He seemed in panic, yet with alert and weary eyes as he glanced at Kimarya, before looking back at a gigantic shadow pushing between trees. This new creature was running on all fours, wolf-like appearance with very long and mangy hair on its back, round ears, and an all-black snout. It was a gigantic hyena thundering out of the brush. This hyena, after ambling out, immediately raised its head. It was roughly 7 feet tall when it had its head raised and with a body over 10 feet long. It advanced at a slow pace, making a very threatening, low growling noise that seemed to shake the very air. So strong she could feel it in her lungs, like when the bass from a large speaker is so strong it shakes your innards. That low-frequency sound reverberating through their body and organs followed by fierce grunting. This hyena looked at its prey and the newfound presence next to it. The hyena had several nasty cuts on its front legs and sides, but it still powerfully stalked closer to its prey. It continued to do so before its low growl suddenly became shrill, whining as it realized the murder crow hovering unfazed in the sky. Its eyes widened before it immediately turned tail and bolted at a speed that didn't match its lumbering body, and dove right back into the brush. It was almost gone before a massive body crashed on top of it, the murder crow. You could hear the hyena's muffled and miserable yelping as its head was brutally smashed into the ground by that massive force. They watched, unable to look away. It was like a macabre-like art. The murder crow's head went up, beak pointing down. The world seemed to stop for a moment before its beak fell furiously towards the soft spot of the hyena's neck. It slammed down like an evil meteor into its bulging artery in that neck. Blood burst out like an unending stream, soaking the crow. Its scream intensified for several seconds before it got halted by a second peck of that beak at the base of its skull. It was like an evil hammer slamming through rotten wood. The murder crow turned around, brandishing its massive wing in their direction. It threw 6 black, glinting feathers at the two of them. Their inexperience made them unable to make use of the crow's distraction to escape while the crow butchered the gigantic hyena. They were even less capable of blocking or dodging this fearsome attack. The boy stepped forward with a serious expression. Knowing fully well that he didn't have the ability to dodge, the air around him started vibrating as a massive shape formed around him. A fearsome snout materialized first, followed by 2 burly front paws that frantically swiped at the feathers that flew towards them like furious black stars. It blocked 4 of them before the remaining 2 pierced deeply into the not yet fully formed body with shining yellow eyes. Amazingly, it looked just like the hyena. The remaining 2 feathers crushed through the hyena form, making the boy fall backwards. Dark blood started to escape from his mouth and nose from the backlash of the defeat of his ancestral spirit guardian form. It was after the hyena's death that he finally unlocked the last barrier in the conquering of its essence and could materialize its form as his very own ancestral spirit guardian. The murder crow was already in the air once more as it rapidly closed in on its 2 remaining prey. They would both make impressive additions to its cacophony of death. The boy got up, took something out of his pouch, and with a ferocious expression swallowed it. The surrounding wind picked up and vibrated much harder than before as he made several rushed hand signs. He was trying to do another forceful ancestral guardian spirit transformation. He wanted to do the same thing he did to the hyena to the murder crow. A booming sound came from his body, and the crow's eyes dimmed and grew unfocused. This change only lasted a measly second before being shaken off by that vicious bird. The boy's face immediately showed his alarm, panic, and disappointment. Knowing that what he did should have stunned it for a minute, long enough to attack it like he did to the bestial hyena, his original plan before all of this was to use this second pill to take more of the essence of the bestial hyena and finish it off before he changed his mind, as he saw the escaping Kimarya and tried to drag his troubles to her and get her help to not waste that precious second pill. Unfortunately, he didn't see that she was being hunted. Not only that, but it was a freaking murder crow. Although it's a very young one, if he knew what it was, he would have run the other way and taken his chances with the hyena alone. At least then he'd have a chance of winning or at least keeping his life. Everyone knows that it's certain death if you encounter the murder crow. Its intelligence, strength, and speed make it into something you essentially can't make into an ancestral guardian spirit. It's simply too devilishly strong, and everyone who has tried never survived the attempt. He muttered, "What awful luck!" as the murder crow came upon them. Kimarya finally escaped completely out of the lull of its genuine attack that incapacitated its prey. She knew that the gorge was her only chance. An unlikely ticket to save herself was just a meter behind her. She could jump down as the murder crow finished off that kid in front of her. She paused before clenching her fist as she ran forward to fight alongside the boy when suddenly she felt some incredible pressure building in her head. Is the crow using its incapacitating call of death again? It can't be. Its beak is closed. She released a pained scream that was followed by a brilliant light shinning from her eyes. She blacked out. All she could see was darkness till she heard a gruff voice, as if unused to speech. "Good job, kid. You actually got this far before this great one had to save you. Ha 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 ha." Kimarya knew this voice was in her head, and in her shock replied, "Who the hell are you?" "Sonny, I have detected foreign entity initiating expulsive and offensive measures. Critical failure, unable to expulse." "Ah!" Kimarya heard Sonny scream. It was the first time she ever heard her scream. She felt a terrible buzzing in her head and was petrified with terror as she realized whatever that voice in her head was. It completely overwhelmed Sonny, her powerful, enhanced subconscious. The voice sounded out again. "Don't worry, ha ha ha. Yours truly is the good guy. Call me Santa." "Just kidding. Everything is perfectly fine. Sonny is fine. Isn't that right, Sonny? I just wanted to make a cool entrance." "Sonny, all systems seem to be uncompromised. We're fine, but we have a putrid, disgusting intruder in your head, Kimarya. This is unacceptable." Kimarya could hear the indignation in Sonny's voice, especially as she ignored the mysterious voice and didn't respond directly to it. Sunny. It, for some unknown reason, has as much authority in this body as we do Kimarya. It's certainly not Drenioi. Foreign entity, please leave immediately. Can't do that, bud. The only reason you even reincarnated together is because of me. So let's all calm down and let your Great One handle this. First, I'm not Santa. I am known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. You may be asking yourself why this Great One saved you. I did it, 1, because I could tell you were a big fan. 2, you were dying, and 3, other reasons. But yeah, I chose you, Pikachu, to make my escape. Kimarya interrupted. That was incredibly lame. Now I definitely know you're a harmless idiot. Where's the murder crow and that other kid? Are you really a Sasquatch? Why are you in my head? What did you escape and why with me? Asked the agitated but no longer as scared Kimarya. It questioningly asked, Lame? I thought it would be cute anyways. You and that boy are really about to get shredded by that nasty bird. But I took you into this separate space outside of the holds of time to chat. So for a short while you're safe, safe enough to dare call this great Sir Lame. Relax as I explain some things to you, before dealing with that interesting bird. It continued. I am Sasquatch. There's only ever been one me. Sasquatch questioningly asked, Why aren't you more excited or even scared after finding out this noble deity's glorious identity? Kimarya responded in a frustrated voice, A 13-foot-tall evil bird has literally been chasing me. I am bleeding all over. I don't have the capability to have any other emotion besides being petrified right now. But suddenly, her eyes suddenly gleamed with a light of passion. Her mouth slightly raised to a badly hidden smile for a second before she forcefully suppressed it and kept a blank face, as she quickly added, Also in the stories and myths they have always mentioned a massive zone spanning the US, Canada, and even in the east around Tibet, of many sightings and many reports have even come in at similar times across the world. So, unless you can be in multiple places at the same time, there are more Sasquatches. Sasquatch responded cheerfully and with an arrogant tone, saying, Grand point, kid. I'll explain that part later, but currently you and I have no more time to talk. The short explanation is that I used your soul and Sunny's bizarre existence to escape your world after some crude knitting to hide my grand and majestic existence from that damned bastard's pitiful awareness. I finally tricked that old fogey and got out. Everything went dark. Kimarya suddenly heard a popping noise, snapping her to attention. She was back in her body, furthermore. She saw a massive claw opening up in a grabbing motion only a few feet from her right shoulder. It was coming from a distance that would be impossible to dodge, a space that could be traversed in less than a second by that monster. She was sure that if it connected, it would crumble her shoulder like flimsy paper. She heard a loud, derisive snort in her head, and she suddenly felt strangely calm. A gaseous substance started swirling around her incredibly fast, raising her up into the air, much faster than the claws of the crow. This substance then instantly formed into a massive humanoid shape with Kimarya floating in its middle, its long and burly arms masterfully grabbing onto the murder crow's claw before its other arm pulled back. Its hand formed a fist. Its newly formed muscles underneath its skin tensed and moved like steel cables full of power before bringing a ferocious fist strike at the murder crow. It was a blow that was way too close and too sudden for the alarmed crow to dodge. Boom! It was hit dead on its chest before immediately rocketing backwards, smashing through 2 trees before finally stopping. Kimarya breathed out a sigh of relief, believing that this fierce strike killed the crow, but it quickly stood back up in an unstable fashion. She saw intense burning rage in its piercing eyes after being wounded in surprise by its prey. The murder crow launched itself almost 20 feet into the air, its wings spreading, trying to catch onto the air before it crashed down back to the earth. One of its wings was broken earlier from her punch and crashing through 2 massive trees. Its wing was bent at an awful angle. Its eyes fiercely glinted as its fury reached a new peak before it hopped forward, crossing almost a distance of 3 meters in a single leap. It raised up its one good wing and madly swung it in her direction. It unleashed more than 24 of its fearsome feathers. It made it seem like all of its previous attacks were merely child's play. Because they were, it was always playing with her, never actually having gone full out in trying to kill her. The air was right away consumed with an awful mass of whistling noises as the dozens of feathers flew like long and darkly glinting shadows at her. Kimarya, in her giant humanoid form, picked up the kid behind her, then dived to the side and narrowly dodged most of the deadly feathers, most of them. Kimarya noticed one penetrated the area of the giant humanoid form right in front of her face. An inch closer would have taken her left eye out. Her giant humanoid form straightened up with fierce, domineering airs. The razor-sharp feathers were squeezed out from all the areas they punctured. Her form's long arm reached down to the ground and grasped the very air, as if grabbing a rock or an object. The murder crow noticed, as well as its eyes glowed brighter with viciousness and wariness. But it saw that there were no rocks or objects underneath those fingers. Its fierce eyes narrowed, as if indignant and humiliated by its prey making a fool of it. The murder crow opened its vicious maw and unleashed its most terrifying call yet. Human screams seemed to rise from all around Kimarya, each more pitiful than the last, all forming a web that tried to crush her consciousness into a cage of madness. As the call sounded out, all the shadows around them grew longer. They stretched towards Kimarya. Weird motes of light started appearing in the air. She could almost make out aggrieved faces whenever she got a clear look at any one of them. As this dreadful cacophony sounded out, a horrible flame coalesced in front of the crow's opened maw. It was pointed right at her. This flame started giving her a weird feeling of absolute lethality and crisis. She knew she should absolutely not let that fire touch her. She felt the hand of her transformed state gripping the air, pulling back as if ready to throw a large rock. The crow continued to glare, apparently still furious and not falling for the trick that was apparently being played on it. The giant humanoid body, in its full 13 feet, got into a stance as if to throw something, before suddenly making a perfect pitching pose. Kimarya couldn't help feeling embarrassed, darkly muttering to herself, "What the hell is Sasquatch doing at a time like—" She didn't finish talking as her surprise pushed all thoughts out of her head. As the giant humanoid pitched the air, the whole body felt as if a large weight was suddenly displaced. The dirt at her feet caved in just a little. Wait, did it actually throw something? I didn't see a rock on the floor. The air started screaming as a blurry shape was flying at the crow, whose eyes opened wide, and awkwardly used its remaining good wing to smack at the air. Amazingly, a large grayish rock fully appeared and smashed this wing. Thunk! The murder crow's body shuddered in clear pain at the heavy impact and noise that sounded out from the rock, hitting its strong muscles on its wings, as well as making it step back to regain its balance. Kimarya, in the gigantic humanoid form, didn't want to be an observer anymore as she tried to gain control. She faced resistance that only after the shortest of moments let her take control. I have an idea. Let's do that rock thing again. But multiple times, how do I do it? Sasquatch's voice answered, You can't, but I can get around that. Just say rock, and grip down near the ground where I can gather the earth element to make it. Then you can lift it up and throw it. Got it! Kimarya leaned down, grasping at the air before muttering rock. Suddenly, she felt something like a mass of very dense water slowly swirling around and between her fingers. She gripped it, and its still translucent form turned hard and heavier by the second as she raised it over her head. The giant, hairy humanoid moved per Kimarya's will into a throwing position before letting loose fiercely, and the large rock twice the size of her head shot out like an invisible cannonball. It flew straight, right at the amalgamation of all the emotions of terror, anger, and anguish, condensed into a vicious flame that was almost ready to be shot out. Every second it grew, the stronger the feeling of deadly crisis grew within Kimarya's heart. This was her target. She hoped that she could interfere with the crow's life-threatening attack, but very soon it was made clear that it wouldn't be easy, as the rock volleying at her target was smashed away by the crow's good wing. Sonny, you have to stop its attack before it fires it, else it's very unlikely we could dodge or defend from that attack. It's radiating a ferocious, flame-like energy. Knew that would not work. Let's try this instead, yelled Kimarya. The giant humanoid Sasquatch reached down, grasped at the air, and pulled back in an extremely domineering fashion before fiercely throwing forward. The murder crow was prepared and swung out its wing at the time frame it calculated for it to successfully block this attack, just like with the previous projectiles, but hit nothing. Its eyes opening wide before turning into slits as it realized I deceived it. Its attack started glowing at a faster rate than before, its call more disturbing. The strange boy was rolling around amid a heavy panic attack, unable to even gather enough sense to run away. Kimarya's form reached down low once more and grasped air before immediately throwing again. The crow swung its wing, not daring to risk being hit. Kimarya repeated this action again, but this time as she grasped down, she whispered, "Rock." The earth elementals danced and converged onto her palm as she pulled back into the pitching pose, and lightly flicked the unhardened mass into the air before following through on her fake pitch as that energy floated up in the air. The crow cawed angrily and swung its wing again. It seemed to be very careful. Not a second after that fake pitch, she leaned down and grabbed at the air before throwing another fake pitch. The crow flinched, swinging out, expecting an actual stone, and its eyes started shining in fury. Kimarya didn't lean down this time. She just snatched upwards and squeezed the amorphous energy into a tiny stone before throwing it furiously. The crow was in mid-swing and couldn't pull back its good wing in time. It tried with its broken wing, but it did not cooperate. Before the rock smashed against the amalgamation of fire in front of its beak, the rock exploded against the flame and the whole construct grew unstable. The murder crow stopped its cacophony attack in its attempt to fully focus on stopping its out-of-control fire attack, but Kimarya wouldn't give it the chance as she took a long step forward, reached down low to the ground, and actually picked up an actual rock before screaming, "Rock!" Maybe it was the urgency in her voice or something, but the elemental earth energies rushed towards her hand and into the rock in her palm that was half the size of her head. The energy coalesced into the rock as it blinked between visible and not before growing dark like a shadow. All of this happened in barely a moment after her last attack landed, and not even 2 seconds passed before she rose, pulled her arm back, gave an embarrassed smile as she pulled into a pitcher's pose in honor of Sasquatch, and threw this attack with all of her might. This rock made no noise as it barreled towards the crow. The murder crow saw all of this and felt grave danger from this attack before giving up on reining in its attack, and in its last-ditch effort prematurely unleashed it. The evil flame flew at an astounding speed while instantly growing twice its size with no hint of stopping its mad growth before Kimarya's attack punctured right through its middle. This flame attack started collapsing within itself right away. Kimarya's attack, losing no momentum after puncturing through the crow's attack, homed in on the crow, who unfurled both its broken and healthy wing and used them to block in front of its head and chest before the attack went straight through both wings and even its chest, continuing right through its heart. Sunny success, you did it, Kimarya. That hairy creature, too. Kimarya laughed while the odd substance around her that made up the giant Sasquatch form swirled around her gently before disappearing. She turned to the boy that seemed to come to reason. She dropped her smile and, glaring at him, asked, "Who are you, and why did you try to share that hyena problem with me?" The boy, still trying to calm down and return his breathing to normal, answered, "Leerum 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶. I'm sorry about the whole hyena thing. I couldn't kill it safely enough, so I tried to find a better way to kill it, or at least seek out a more favorable environment. I was doing that till I saw you running. I admit that it was a little shameful of me to force my problem onto you to help me kill it. But I made such a big effort trying to make it into my ancestral spirit guardian and felt too pressured." Kimarya huffed, still upset, before Leerum continued in a distressed voice. "I never would have imagined you had such awful luck to be targeted by a murder crow. Not even if I had 10 more guts would I dare run to you, not even if I knew you had a demonic ape as an ancestral spirit guardian." Kimarya heard an indignant snort in her head. "How dare he confuse me, this great and magnanimous lord, as a pitiful demonic ape?" grumbled Sasquatch after hearing what Leerum said. She asked him, "What's a demonic ape?" Leerum, thinking that Kimarya recklessly got a creature she couldn't identify, said, "It's a grade 5 spirit beast. Its species reproduce fast and are incredibly powerful and annoying due to reaching this level of strength immediately after becoming adults. The only downside is that their potential is so abysmal that the best possible scenario is only transcending up to a grade 1 creature, which is not terrible strength. In fact, it's incredible strength, but after reaching a certain level of attainments in cultivation, you lose the advantage of its strength, and it could even lower your innate potential. Many people looking to reach incredible heights of power too quickly pick these as ancestral spirit guardian forms, but lose out in the long run." Leerum lowered his voice and averted his gaze awkwardly after accidentally saying that. "Okay, I understand," responded Kimarya, thinking about the response Sasquatch gave, as she was thinking herself lucky and asking in her head, "Sunny, do you have more information on the spirit beast grading system?" Sunny: "Yes, I do. The spirit beast system is essentially like this. First stage, animal grade 1, 2. Second stage, beast grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For example, the hyena from earlier is a grade 2 beast, and this hairy intruder is a demonic ape, a grade 5 beast." Kimarya heard a sarcastic tone at the end of Sunny's assessment before feeling the anger and indignation of Sasquatch rumbling over before it loudly interjected, You dare call this great sir a demonic ape? I am an existence that transcends all of your mortal understanding. I've witnessed events and things you could never imagine. Sunny coldly interrupted with more information. Third stage. Creature grade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fourth stage. Broken existence grade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alignment evolution. Chaotic existence. Neutral existence. Lawful existence. Fifth stage. Leerum looked at the quiet Kimarya, who was seemingly in a daze as he thought that he upset her with his unfiltered response before asking, "What's your name?" Kimarya ignored the still upset and grumbling Sasquatch and paused Sunny's prompts as she looked back at Leerum before hesitatingly answering. "My name is 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶 Stormblood, but please call me Kimarya." Leerum was about to continue before he choked on his next breath and in an unsettled tone quickly asked, "That family, so you're a chosen... Wait, you're that 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶? The supreme warrior body and holy daughter of the Stormblood family? You can't be her, she..." He stopped himself from continuing as Kimarya fiercely glared at him. "I didn't want to say that. Please punish me for my transgression." Kimarya felt a headache coming in as she grabbed Leerum, getting to get him to stop kowtowing and stand, but to her great alarm noticed she couldn't make him budge a single inch. Before finally yelling, "Stop that, I know you didn't mean it. Let's just get back to the village before another murder crow or something comes and really does kill us." Leerum stiffened after hearing this and got up saying, "Thank you, Holy Kimarya." Kimarya awkwardly smiled before following Sunny's instructions to make it back to the village with Leerum in tow, a journey made easier thanks to the increasing light from the rising sun. After traveling a day and a half before finally bumping into a guard station letting them know the location of the slain murder crow and hyena, as Kimarya and Leerum received medical treatment and were led to their own personal waiting rooms to wait for the conclusion of the trial. After waiting a few days, she heard knocking, only to be surprised by an awkward Leerum at her door with an odd bag in his hands. "I wanted to give you these for saving me as well as compensation for taking the murder crow's core. I'm sure you know how important it is for stabilizing and completing the Ancestral Guardian forms," he said as he handed her the pouch. He continued saying, "This is a spatial pouch, the only one in my family. Inside of it is everything usable of the murder crow except the core. I desperately needed it to finish my ancestral spirit guardian form. But without a murder crow as an ancestral spirit guardian, the core wouldn't help you, even if you found another one. Its benefits would be less. But please know that its flesh is considered a cultivation treasure. It is a creature that has absorbed and amassed an incredible amount of natural energies, so it will greatly help in your cultivation. Its feathers could be used as weapons and even as a resource to build a formidable cloak with great defensive strength." Sunny, spatial pouches are incredibly valuable, like the name suggests. They are a lot bigger inside than the outside. They are built with using a fantastical technique and special ingredients. Kimarya was shocked and held onto the spatial pouch before replying, "I'll give you the pouch back when I'm done with all of it. I can't accept it, it's too special to give it away." Leerum shook his head before saying, "Thank you for your assistance, whole Kimarya." Then he immediately sprinted away. Kimarya, with an amused smile, closed the door. After a few days alone, she and Sunny digested and comprehended more and more of 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶 knowledge and had a more complete understanding of this world and cultivation that is so important to everyone. They learned that cultivation is the sacred process of power that improves health, increases longevity, known as the very path to power. This is done through the cultivation and comprehension of natural ambient energies, known as 𝐃𝐢𝐯, as you advance on your own path in building your Tao foundation. The Tao is the path in your heart, your set of principles, your hopes, your goals, your emotions, and everything that makes up who you are. There are no wrong paths in the advancement of your Tao. This is what makes up the base and foundation of your cultivation. The growth of your comprehension of the Tao is what allows your cultivation to grow. Comprehension of the natural laws, else you risk 𝐶 deviation. A correct balance of these two, plus your innate talents, determines how fast you can have cultivation breakthroughs and how far you can go. When finding out someone's attainment, better known as cultivation base, there are distinct impressions given by one's aura. The cultivation levels she was aware of so far are as follows. The Tao is the path in your heart, your set of principles, your hopes, your goals, your emotions, and everything that makes up who you are. There are no wrong paths in the advancement of your Tao. This is what makes up the base and foundation of your cultivation. The comprehension of your Tao must grow with your cultivation and comprehension of the natural laws, else you risk qi deviation. A correct balance of these two, plus your innate talents, determine how fast you can have cultivation breakthroughs. When finding out someone's attainment, better known as cultivation base, there are distinct impressions given by one's aura that allow others to identify their cultivation stage. The cultivation levels she was aware of so far are Awakened Realm, Transcended Realm, Eclipse, Realm Nirvana, Realm Karmic Sage Realm, Shrine Caster Realm, Immortal Realm, Flake, God Realm, Falling Star Realm, God, Tribulation Realm. Kimarya thought these stages to be very interesting, especially the part of Immortal and God parts. So cultivators can live forever? Sunny. There is a lot of speculation, but immortality is one of the primary goals in cultivation. Another one is solving whether they can reach the peak of existence and the ultimate power that comes with it. This environment and world can be very dangerous. These cultivators can change the weather, crumble mountains, sink islands, raise entire lands, and kill countless people if they wish to. Kimarya replied, "Can I start now? How do I do it?" Sunny. The basis for cultivation revolves around your comprehension of nature, usually referred to as the Tao. This is a comprehension of something marvelously intertwined and overlapping at least three things. First is understanding the natural world and its phenomenon, the second being the natural laws within energies, and third is developing your own path in cultivation. These three are essential to being at the peak of any level at your cultivation level. Lacking any one of these will result in lower subpar quality in your energy, power, mind, and body. Kimarya's eyes were practically shining with excitement when suddenly her vision blurred and her consciousness slipped away for a second. As her eyesight cleared up, she saw she was floating off the floor and couldn't move her body. An invisible pressure she couldn't even think of resisting held her. She couldn't control any aspect of herself, not even to blink when she wished. Her body continued breathing by itself, her eyes blinked by themselves. The power was both completely overwhelming, yet gentle. She floated there, not even moving a millimeter from that position she floated in. Nothing moved besides her body still breathing and blinking. She heard the cold and bitter voice of a woman. "You, what did you do to my precious Draenioi?" The voice started out in a barely audible whisper until it grew into a low snarl that reverberated and crashed through her mind, building up into an almost overwhelming vibration that threatened to drive her insane. This was the worst pain she ever felt. It was so awful she was almost immediately on the brink of insanity. Her mind was unable to focus. The sound similar to static from TV was all she could hear and feel, along with the indescribable pain. It was so awful that in her complete desperation that if she weren't immobilized, she may have even ended it all by biting her own tongue off. It was that awful. Kimarya felt so much pain she couldn't think, and just when she felt she would die, it all stopped. "I know you aren't my little one," said the voice. Grouthie felt such pain, nearly overwhelming grief yet fury. She broke the rules on not seeing her child before the final results of the trial that the Chosen must overcome. If only she wasn't the chief of her auxiliary village with all her responsibilities and customs of the clan, she wouldn't have minded downgrading and becoming a common citizen and not having her child be part of the Chosen of this newer generation. She loved her baby so much, she decided to not give her protection. She hoped this trial would help her wake up, even if it meant her death. Her future would only have been limited if she was protected. Even if she wasn't aware of the protection, it would still be too great of a splash in the oceans of karma, and ultimately a blemish in her Tao if she truly decided to head down the path of cultivation. But her little one isn't there anymore. If it wasn't for the remnant emotions of her little Dre revealing that there was no foul play, or that she would hurt the body of her offspring, she would have erased this soul that dared occupy her child's body. With her skills in augury, she saw that little Dre accepted everything. That little Dre accepted her, that she was even happy. That maybe this person could accomplish her mama's hopes for her, but she was wrong. All I ever really wanted for her was her happiness. I admit that like any parent, I wanted you to crush all others and gain our family face and prestige, but it was only ever secondary. I'm sorry I called you a silly or dumb little girl. I'm sorry I tried to keep you from looking at those spider webs. I knew it made you happy, but I all the same chastised you for it. You never failed me, little one. I had my hopes for you. I was even going to forcibly take you away and not have you take these trials. I had the power to do it. Your father convinced me. Or I let myself be convinced. At the last second, you gripped my hand and said, "Mama, I'll go." It was one of the few times you ever spoke. My heart shook and beat much stronger than when I was steeling myself to crush tradition and swim against the stream. If I knew this would have happened, I may have done it. Even your death would have been easier. Then you'd be resting within the trees and waters, humming that special song you only hum to the spider webs, or when I held you, dear child of mine. That would be easier than seeing a stranger in your body, using the child I carried within. The child I carried within me for 9 long months. I've lived thousands of years, but those 9 months with you felt like a lifetime. 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶 felt her tears welling up in her eyes, her breathing almost losing control. I can't see her body like this. In the eyes of this new person, I didn't see any bad or sense any malice. She steeled herself and made her choice and said, "I know your name. You asked that boy to call you Kimarya instead of the name I gave my child, and you aren't my child. I won't kill you, even though I'm feeling such maddening fury. I don't know what kind of ties I will have with you, but later on, I will." Kimarya gently floated down and was dazed for a long time as to what the hell just happened. Kimarya realized that this voice, this person, was Draenoy's mother, 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶. She realized that she knew that I wasn't her daughter. Seems I escaped a calamity for now and resolved the whole dilemma on whether to hide my identity from her parents or how to let them know. Sonny Kimarya, I have detected some bizarre traces of the phenomena that happened. I have not made sense of the results of the scans. Even that hairy creature was hiding, and likely couldn't have done much of anything to assist. This great sir was asleep and never noticed, else I would have been able to save you if it were to get dangerous, half-heartedly responded Sasquatch. Knock, knock, knock. A loud and stern voice followed after the knocking, saying, "It is time for the evaluation of the trial. Chosen, Draenoy, please follow me." Kimarya shook the last traces of her days away and followed the guard up a large hill with colossal stones in a formation reminding her of Stonehenge, of her previous world, except much bigger and more intact. There were 20 other kids her age, or Draenoy's age, standing together while there were 5 elders on a large rock with a smaller formation of stones, with an oddly shaped green stone in the middle. Everyone around Kimarya was making a large fuss over the person in the middle, saying things like, "Who is he?" and "Why are the elders treating him with such high esteem and respect?" as they noticed how the other elders treated the cloaked man in the middle. The cloaked figure in the middle, who appeared to be a middle-aged man with green hair poking outside of their cloak and had the largest presence out of all the other elders, spoke. "Welcome back, chosen and trial takers of this village. I am Shamaner, nominal Grand Elder. I am here to oversee this ceremony as well as to look for a disciple, hope to be treated well by everyone." He continued, "Please come one at a time to the virtuold augury stone here at the center. Place your hand here, and it will respond to 2 things like ancestral spirit and latent talent. It would show a silhouette of your ancestral guardian spirit and stars for your amount of latent talent. 1 star means little or no talent for cultivation. 2 stars mean below average talent for cultivation. 3 is decent talent for cultivation. 4 is average talent for cultivation. 5 is great talent for cultivation. 6 is genius level talent for cultivation. 7 is demon level talent, which only appears once every 10,000 years. There were 54 participants this year, only 10 were chosen, and the rest were average villagers who took the test." Kimarya looked around, but the number of kids around her was still 20. She muttered, "Don't tell me these are all the survivors." Shamaner kept talking. "Only 20 have made it back from our holy zone, 7 of them being chosen. Please start coming forward one at a time, although this process is only mandatory for the chosen." Kimarya saw in Draenoy's memories that it was a great honor to show your ancestral guardian spirit and latent talent, especially when getting a master-disciple relationship with a high-level elder. Kimarya watched people go up one at a time. The first person, a girl, got 3 stars and a sort of slug creature with a spiked shell. The second person had a large snake creature with the head of a wolf, and an amazing amount of 5 stars that drew in some gasps. It's a steel wolf-headed snake, and they even have 5 stars. More and more of them went by till the 6th chosen had a winged 3-eyed tiger which drew the most amount of attention till it was shadowed by an amazing 6 stars of a true genius. A few of the elders conversed, nodding their heads in excitement and clear approval. Kimarya heard kids around her talking, saying, "Alistair, he actually has such amazing latent talent in combination with that dreadful 3-eyed winged tiger. He will surely be a pillar of the village and clan." Kimarya decided to go after him so she wouldn't bring up that much attention. She walked forward and noticed that everyone had a strange reaction to her, but she just ignored it and walked forward till she was in front of the stone. She looked up at the elder named Shamaner, who looked back with a light smile and nodded for her to put her hand on the stone. "For all my life I was a tree, just a normal tree, till that day when I was burning to death, until I heard the thrumming of a heavenly Tao. It was a sermon sung by stars, its reverberations permeating through all the trees, the animals, mud, and stones. A sermon talking of a magnificent and extraordinary Tao. My greatest plight and salvation came from a little round stone that fell from the sky. That landed in my trunk, that only brought me burning pain, and I would have most certainly been burned to mere ashes and embers had it not been for the fierce and horrifying storm that kept those fires from growing uncontrollably. Even with the luck of having a storm raging to combat the fires, it still burned me down to a mere stump. But as a treekin and child of the forests, my tenacity is strong. Even from a not very thick branch, I could still have hope for rebirth. After escaping that calamity and almost passing on, there was a mysterious stone that was still lodged inside of my trunk. I heard this whispering. It was the whispering of the cosmos. It told of a sermon that was transmitted through an indescribable humming that resonated with me and somehow made me grow strongly. This stone vibrated so strongly that it was even breaking my growing around it and thoroughly making it harder to cover it, but the sermon made my life force burst out of all limitations I had as a simple mango tree. Being a tree, we always had a limited amount of awareness of our environment. Time flows differently for those of the treekin. Before, the only thing that mattered was the connection to each other. This connection always let us know of the dangers any of us faced, whether a more successful nest of termites pop up, or skyfire strikes one of us with more rings in their trunks. It all just started with my asking of questions rather than always hearing and or exchanging info about my health. I asked, "Who am I?" The sermons and the stone were deeply imprinted into my mind and body. As the years passed and I grew more and more, its perpetual thrumming made it so my roots had a barely discernible vibration that it only showed evidence of itself when I drove my roots deeper into the earth. Rather than always going around stones, I wanted them out of my way, and so I pushed them. My bark grew strong and very dense, and my thoughts came faster and clearer. I stopped asking who I was, started listening, I stopped talking about myself, and just felt with all of my senses, and unlike before, I remembered everything even after a long while. I began to always surprise myself when I had new knowledge of things. This made it better to listen to other things because I could comprehend. I listened to the winds and said, "Hello?" I listened to the rain and asked, "How are you?" I noticed the creatures living on and around my bark and enjoying my fruits and told them, "I'm here." I followed the water landing on my leaves and down my branches and trunk as it made its way flowing down into the ground, following my roots before leaving me and melting deep into the earth that holds me. I told it, "Thank you." I became more aware as this Tao told me of all things in the world. It told me of humans, both mortal ones and cultivators. It said I could become one, but at that moment I didn't yet have an answer, nor reason to want to be one. At least until I saw my first human. They noticed my fruits on the floor, but climbed up and plucked several before going back down and leaving. With time, I was just happy and content, always watching the humans who passed by increasingly often around me, as well as always listening to the teachings of the Tao. Soon, new kinds of humans came. The teachings told me they were cultivators. They were capable of climbing or even jumping up to my highest branches with such ease to pick some of my fruits. I came to learn that these were the famed cultivators that I learned about who delved into the profundities of the natural and unnatural world. This went on for a while till one day one of the cultivators decided to sit down and cultivate under my leaves and was alarmed as they realized comprehension of natural laws was drastically much easier, and they stayed there meditating for days till weird manifestations occurred around them. She had long hair and a small frame and wore these robes. Her hair and robes flutter-red, yet there was no wind flowing. After the manifestations stopped, they rose and left. After some time, they came back with two more cultivators, and surprisingly didn't go for my fruits, but just sat under my leaves and just meditated. The two new arrivals, almost immediately after closing their eyes, found it incredibly easy to go into a profound state where all of their previous shortcomings and questions were easier to solve. They stayed there for days and left, but every once in a while they would come back to cultivate under my leaves, and I soon grew accustomed to this. Other times they searched around the area talking of treasure, but after a while found nothing but realized the area of effect was around me, and continued with their new routine of meditating under my leaves. One day the first cultivator came back. She was with this older person with a powerful and intimidating aura, as if a sword in a scabbard who could explode with incredible strength. She addressed that person as elder, apparently. They were here to investigate. The person even dove into the ground in their examinations. But eventually, they ended up where I was and murmured, "This tree is very slightly vibrating. Maybe it got connected to a very minor energy vein in the earth, or just maybe encountered some sort of fate where it may even come to life." Not long after they left, this elder brought disciples to the tree every often, to preach under my leaves the teachings of the Tao. Sometimes they even brought odd plants to cultivate around my trunk and even treasured soils to help me, which made me very happy and also made me grow very strong. I always listened and paid attention to everything, even to the times a lone disciple decided to come at night to practice as they moved around, chanting scriptures of different teachings. One day, during a very crowded preaching of the Tao, I finally couldn't help it. I had so many questions as to where they went, other natural Taos, and even the very rare mentions of mystical creatures that the Tao spoke of. I wanted to experience it all, and knew it wouldn't happen if I stayed like this, no matter how content I was. I wanted and needed more, so I said yes. I wanted to be a human. At that moment, hymns sang out from thin air, random lights flashed about. Even the shy spirits came to bear witness to what was happening. My whole self was shrinking into itself. My roots quickly returned to me from rich mineral grounds deep below. My leaves let go and fluttered in the air. My branches shrunk into me till I was a wooden, humanoid figure. Soon my skin formed, my organs appeared, and blood was born in my veins. The most wonderful moment was when my heart, yes, my heart first started beating. I was alive, I was a human, and I could become a cultivator. I slowly raised my head and realized I had curly green hair on my head, and smiled, not just with my being, but with my face, which also had lovely facial muscles beneath it. I first tried to speak but felt an ache and realized my lungs had no air. I took a deep breath, breathing in and even smelling the wonderful air, and spoke for the first time, awkwardly at first, but I said, "Hey, my name is Shamaner." Kimarya heard murmurings like, "She's still immortal and hasn't cultivated." Others saying, "She's a special case, she has no soul, incapable of even understanding cultivation. It's a miracle she even survived, and much more so if she actually obtained an ancestral spirit." With a sad shake of their heads. Some even found her misfortune amusing and were ready to enjoy the show. She ignored them and placed her right hand on the stone that quickly grew warm and started humming, until suddenly images started manifesting around her. There was a silhouette of a large humanoid creature with long arms and hair all over. Everyone was surprised. Those who sneered blanched in shock before regaining their confidence and saying, "Sure it's not something pathetic. Guess she wasn't as dumb and knew she had no potential and chose some bloody demonic ape, stupidly cutting off her future wings. They don't even have a redeeming power. So besides having quick and easy power, it's the same as closing off your future for quick strength. Bet she won't even get higher than 3 stars in aptitude. She may have instincts, but that doesn't mean she has any aptitude for cultivation. Heh." Kimarya ignored this and kept her hand on the stone that grew hotter, and soon around her a star formed, then another, and they kept appearing till there were a jaw-dropping 7 stars glowing around her. The stars even had multiple colors. At first, there was silence. Some of the crowd even started to grow excited till they realized that the elders weren't smiling, and some of the not-so-smart ones finally understood why. Her ancestral guardian spirit was a demonic ape, which meant that nearly all chances of future success were nearly zero. Her future growth was severed, as if cultivation didn't have walls and points of extreme difficulty, added with the calamity of growth barriers that demonic apes had. This could only be the cruelest joke ever. Some elders sadly shook their heads. How could this happen? Such a demonic level of aptitude just for it to be wasted because of an erroneous choice in an ancestral spirit guardian. It could be worked around even if it was a speed-based creature. Even a flying bug would have been better. Even they had higher chances of mutation and atavism than demonic apes. Something that is impossible with the demonic apes, who seem to have been cursed by the old heavens. Even if your additional ancestral guardian spirit has a higher growth potential than the demonic ape, the curse of the heavens will still limit future growth. It gives great and immediate power as well as a very useful tool, but only if you accept you won't ever grow past a certain point. Only those with subpar aptitude or who wish for a fast increase in power at the cost of a higher future choose these creatures. Shamanar's eyes had a barely perceptible glint in his eyes as he watched all of this happen, and as Kimarya was awkwardly somewhat holding herself up with confidence that shouldn't match the atmosphere as she was stepping down from the platform. While Kimarya was stepping down, Leerum was closely watching her this whole time and found her reaction odd. What he was about to do now, with taking advantage of her moment, didn't feel very good. Usually, he only cared about matters having to do with him and his family, but he felt an unpleasant taste in his mouth about this. He had no negative feelings towards her, nor many positive ones, besides considering everything they went through significant. But he needed to take advantage of this situation that he knew would have happened, albeit never imagined her talent would be so absurd. He already found her extremely intimidating, and that's without mentioning her unmatched latent talent, but he mostly felt sad to her reduced prospects in cultivation. He shook his head and stepped up and onto the platform, looked at all the elders before politely bowing before placing his hand on the deep green 𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵 stone and felt the pull of the stone. Kimarya watched Leerum while she hid a smirk that tried to rise to her face. How could she not have imagined that the person that would immediately go up after her disappointing display would be the sly Leerum? She expected to feel more upset, but found it more amusing and not as bad if it were someone else. Suddenly the stone started shining, and a piercing cry rang out, where the most cowardly jumped, and all the elders furrowed their brows, looking around for a second, till their gaze rested on the manifestations rising around Leerum. After that, they heard mad laughter and a cacophony of sounds from many kinds of creatures. A vicious beak rose out of the black gas, an enormous wings spread open, and piercing blue eyes blinked into existence and stared into the skies, looking through everyone present with a deep dignity deep within. Underneath the murder crow's manifestation, a vicious hyena stood very still, as if subdued by the murder crow that overwhelmed the senses of all the younger people present. Everyone gasped, even a few of the elders. Everything was quiet for a second till some started to shouting and speaking of how amazing that Leerum managed to get a murder crow and a bestial hyena, though everyone focused more on the fact that he managed to get the murder crow. Then the stars started forming above Leerum, the part that mattered almost as much as the ancestral guardian spirit. One star, then a second and third star formed. It didn't just stop there either. It went to 5 stars, and a hazy 6th slowly formed to the gasps of the crowd. Alistair, standing in the front of the crowd who has been ignored, furrowed his brows, and a venomous glint appeared in his eyes. The elders around Leerum and the 𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵 𝐴𝐵𝐴𝐵𝐵 stone all nodded their heads and gave praise to this youngster, especially considering he was not a child of noble birth. Very few have been able to defeat an infant murder crow. It could be said that the future prospects of this member of the younger generation would be almost limitless. Leerum smiled and bowed again to the elders before walking off the stage, something that made several of them nod in approval only after seeing his potential, while 𝐃𝐢𝐯 only smiled in an unreadable way. After Leerum, a few others went up with different talent ranging in 3-5 stars, of those only 2 others having 5 stars and amazing ancestral guardian spirits. Last up was another well-known member of the younger generation, 𝐃𝐢𝐯 Swordtooth, who had 6 stars of talent and the dreadful winged vampire kangaroo variant that was just as shocking as Leerum's and Alistair's results. The testing ended as a High Elder walked up and told all the participants to get their share of resources based on their results at the auxiliary treasury, and that 𝐃𝐢𝐯 had made his decision and will contact those he had picked. Kimarya followed the crowd to the auxiliary treasury before being approached by a quiet and awkward Leerum. He started saying, "Hey," before Kimarya interrupted him. "Save it. The less attention I get, the better. Just don't let it become a habit or I'll consider it a serious offense against me. Oh, and now you owe me another favor." She smiled while narrowing her eyes. Leerum involuntarily gulped at her threat. He wasn't sure why someone who had yet to cultivate could be so intimidating. He nodded his head in agreement and started talking to Kimarya. "Right now we're going to pick up some resources, which is 300 exemplary grade energy jades and 20 blessed grade energy jades. We can also choose 2 exemplary items," Kimarya muttered in her head. Sunny, based on the information we have, there are 7 levels of energy jades, which function as both the currency of this world and energy resource that contain massive amounts of natural energy that are also used as power sources. The 7 energy jade grades are exemplary grade, blessed grade, sacred grade, holy grade, celestial grade, divine grade, immortal grade energy. Jades are naturally occurring precious stones containing dense amounts of natural energies, typically found deep underground or in special areas containing a high concentration of energy for many years for them to grow. Kimarya smiled and internally thanked Sunny, who she felt gave a smug smile toward Sasquatch, who immediately started to grumble and bicker with Sunny, as Kimarya tuned them out and paid attention to Leerum, who was moving her through the small crowd of other kids who had just taken the test. Kimarya was excited as well to see what kind of items the treasury would have, and if they would help her initiation in cultivation, so allowed herself to be led by Leerum. When they got there, they could see that everyone was there, though most of the attention was focused on Alistair and 𝐃𝐢𝐯. Some of it was drawn towards Leerum and Kimarya when they arrived. Alistair only gave an arrogant smile at Leerum, as if to mock this commoner from a lowly family in decline that dares try to climb up on a pedestal that he was born to reign on. 𝐃𝐢𝐯 gave a quick glance at Leerum and Kimarya before ignoring them, and even Alistair. Alistair seemed to be the crowd's favorite, as he wasn't cold to those that approached to fawn over him, unlike 𝐃𝐢𝐯, but also from a prestigious and noble family called the 𝐶𝐷𝐵𝐵. 𝐃𝐢𝐯 was from a very ancient and powerful family line known as the Swordtooth clan. So even with his haughty arrogance that puts no one in his sights, many people still crowded around him, although a greater distance than those around Alistair. Some of the other kids on the outskirts went over to say hello to Leerum and establish good ties with him. He came from an ancient but vastly deteriorating family that lost its qualifications and the great honor for their younger generation to qualify as chosen for several generations already. Leerum was much more humble than 𝐃𝐢𝐯 and more approachable than Alistair, so he got along well with several. Kimarya herself was approached by 1 or 2 people. One girl named Dara VoidSpire approached Kimarya. She seemed to be around 13 years old, like everyone. She had long hair that went past her shoulders. She wore several gemstones and gave the impression of a comfortable yet quirky and cheerful person. As they arrived at the treasury, Kimarya was genuinely excited to choose. As they walked in one by one, they were handed a choice of small spatial bag or ring with ingredients and other special items. Alistair peered into his bag before he gave his to a lackey smugly, saying it's not something that can reach his eyes. 𝐃𝐢𝐯 didn't even glance at or accept the spatial bag offered to him, as if nothing offered was even worth his consideration. Soon it was Kimarya's turn, and considering she already had the spatial bag Leerum gave to her, she decided to receive a ring instead of another bag, and slipped it onto her left pointer finger. For many of those that finished the trial, this was their first spatial item, and were very excited even before considering the rewards within. After everyone else received either a bag or ring, they met an elder who managed the treasury, who handed each 3 glowing slips of papers with runes drawn on them and explained that they are necessary for them to be able to remove weapons and/or items from a rack. They explained that everyone must place the paper on the item to be able to remove it, and that it only worked for items on the first 4 floors. Obviously, they could only get 1 item per slip of paper. As everyone split off into a few different groups, a large one centered around Alistair headed in one direction, and another group of 3, 2 girls and 1 boy, made their way into a side row. Naturally, Kimarya was one of the girls, the other Dara, and the boy, being Leerum, cheerfully chatting with Dara. It seemed the 2 grew up as good friends. Luckily, Leerum didn't allow Kimarya to be excluded from their conversation, as he pointed out weapons excitedly and their properties. It seemed like Leerum was a weapons fanatic, and Dara as well. Kimarya saw that the floors of the treasury were truly massive, to the point that they never bumped into more people, choosing items as they browsed through. Leerum looked over and asked Kimarya, "What kind of weapons are you thinking of choosing?" Kimarya stopped to think. "I've never held a weapon in my life besides a stun gun or a toy at laser tag." Kimarya responded to Leerum, asking, "Are there any of those that fire projectiles, like a bow or crossbow?" Leerum stopped to think for a second before he was playfully knocked on the head by Dara, who giggled as she said, "Idiot, why are you thinking so long? Of course, there are. A sign up ahead even says projectile weapons." She turned to Kimarya and said, "Come, follow your big sister." Leerum quietly followed behind the 2, muttering to himself, wondering why she seemed so unfamiliar to something so well known. Kimarya was starting to really like Dara. She learned that Dara is a serious and in-your-face fighter that easily rushes into combat, with a straightforward attitude to match, who also cherishes friendship. Kimarya also learned that her ancestral guardian spirit was the deadly nightmare panther, a great choice that had a very powerful constitution as well as one of the better growth potentials seen today. As Dara led the way, they arrived at the projectile weapon section after a few minutes of walking, where Kimarya saw many weapons like composite bows, short bows, long bows, crossbows, dart blower, and throwing knives. Kimarya was imagining a crossbow, so she browsed through that area till she saw an interesting one that Dara also noticed and said, "That looks pretty strong. Says here that it's called Sinful Tundra, a repeating crossbow." Kimarya walked closer to the crossbow, noticing it was mostly black and some brown, with a rectangular section on the top for the bolts. There were ancient-looking blue runes on the underside. Kimarya decided at once that she had to have this crossbow. She even felt a sort of resonance with it. Kimarya placed 1 paper over the bow, and after a flash of gray light, the crossbow was free from its invisible constraints, where Kimarya could finally hold it in her hands. She felt a strange power flowing inside of the bow as she held it before putting it away into her bag of holding. Leerum was farther back looking at a bow this whole time, but he also paid enough attention to notice that Dara and I looked at him. He said, "This is called Freezing Bow of the Wolves, and it also has 2 elements, ice and wind." After Leerum said that, Dara was about to say something, but he quickly put his paper onto the bow, releasing it and putting it away. Dara shook her head before looking back at Kimarya, where she said, "Guess it's my turn. I'd follow the trend and get a bow or whatever, but I'd never use it. Plus, I have bad accuracy." She gave a mischievous smile before saying, "I enjoy being up close where the sweat and blood dance, where I can look my enemy in the eye, right before stomping them into the ground. Heh heh heh." She once again led the way, till they saw short swords, long swords, scimitars, maces, bludgeons, and mauls. Dara stopped and reached toward a large, half-wooden, half-metal bludgeon before muttering, "This is perfect." Kimarya thought she could even see stars in her eyes. She could only chuckle and walk closer and clearly see its name. "Haughty thunder bludgeon of the tiger, a weapon of 2 elements, metal and electricity. It had incredible hardness and weight from the metal elemental aspect and extreme speed of electricity." No wonder Dara was so excited. It was an incredible and oppressive combination for combat that rightfully earned the tiger in its name. Dara quickly pressed her paper slip to the top of it to release and claim ownership of this incredible weapon. Kimarya felt there was already a good connection within their small group, so she felt it was her turn to get a second weapon, or item. Apparently, it was something everyone else implicitly understood by the expectant looks both Dara and Leerum had when looking at her. So Kimarya asked, "Is there a miscellaneous section we can choose from? I sort of feel I could choose a non-combat item. Maybe later I could get a shielding item as well. Leerum and Dara both had an odd reaction before Leerum responded. I've been here before. There are some useful items for crafters and random kinds of items used to build complex formations. Kimarya was intrigued by the understanding she inferred from the word formation that Leerum mentioned before asking in her head, Sunny, what formations is he referring to? As Leerum led the way, Sunny answered Sunny. By formations, you can consider it as a magical script of power. These scripts, designs are derived from their understanding of natural phenomena in the universe, mimicking effects like fire, electricity, pressure, etc. It's basically natural laws that were derived through generations that have power and affect change when written. It's very similar to programming. The universe and reality is a computer, and it is those experiencing it that are creating micro-versions of the world onto items or space. They are built using the powers of the profound ways or cultivation and are powered in three ways. Either unique and powerful ingredients used to create the item that accumulates energy on their own and from their environment, could be powered with the energy contained within energy jades and even from the energy from cultivators themselves. These formations can do things like shielding the sect for as long as they have energy jades, or are powered by cultivators that can hopefully overpower and defend against attacks. They can protect from unauthorized access, attacks, and natural calamities. Usually entire cities, sects, towns, monasteries, and homes. Formations can do attacks. They can cause effects on environments like allowing concentration and empowering cultivation comprehension to better help cultivators. Their functions and applications are limitless. Kimarya's eyes were shining. This was almost exactly like programming, something she did professionally and had a grand passion with in her previous life. She thought to herself, I wonder what amazing things I could create in the future. As they walked through many sections of weapons, they saw an elder carrying a large, old, and rusty cauldron that, for some odd reason, caught Kimarya's attention. Her eyes made contact with the elder's eyes, who then stopped and asked, Yes, can I help you with something, little one? Kimarya drew on some confidence and said, That cauldron, could I perhaps get it? The elder blinked at the surprising question before responding, This is an ancient cauldron that no longer works, so it's going to be stored in the back to be used later as scraps. It is ancient, but it was created with excellent material that we could reuse to make new items. She responded, I want it, please. Can I trade it for this paper that I received? Leerum and Dara were both shocked and implored her to not do that. They explained that there are cauldrons of much higher quality up ahead and on not wasting this opportunity on trash. The elder was shocked and also told her to reconsider. Kimarya hesitated after seeing everyone's reactions, but when she looked back at the cauldron, the feeling she initially had only grown even stronger. Sasquatch suddenly said, You wouldn't be making a mistake to get that old item. This great one feels it's not as simple as it appears. Kimarya decided and said more firmly, I need this cauldron. Please allow me to take it. The elder shook his head as if to say no as he thought about how precious the metal was, but seeing how determined Kimarya was and the slip of paper, he conceded. Very well, but just so you don't feel that this old uncle is cheating you out of this very special paper slip, you can have some basic crafting supplies. The rest of the discarded and faulty items this old one was going to recycle as well, since you appear to be an aspiring crafter, chuckled the elder. Although they were going to be recycled, you might be able to use some for a while as you grow in your studies without fear of expensive failures in this arduous path. The materials they are made of are not too bad. I'll be right back. Please be patient. After 20 minutes of being questioned by Dara and Leerum, as well as rejecting the crazy suggestion from the daring Dara, who said that we could run before the elder returns with the rusty old cauldron, Leerum quickly covered her mouth, saying, Don't be rude, Dara. A minute later, they heard the footsteps of the elder, who had a ring of holding in his hand. Kimarya walked over with the paper slip and put it in the elder's hand, who handed the ring to her. Kimarya accepted the ring, even though she wasn't yet able to check its contents due to not yet cultivating. She also thought it would be too rude to have Leerum check in front of the elder. Kimarya thanked the elder before turning to leave, but was stopped by the elder. Everyone has less than 10 minutes to finish choosing items. I'm sorry for my delay taking 20 of your minutes, but I suggest hurrying up. There is a very special announcement coming, so the time limit will be enforced. Kimarya said, Sorry, I took up so much of your time, Leerum and Dara. I think the best thing to do is split up so we have enough time to make such an important decision. Dara was about to retort, but was interrupted by Leerum. She's right, Dara. We can meet up later, but we really don't have enough time. I'll take my leave first and see you guys outside in 10 minutes. Leerum quickly left while Dara hesitated for a moment before heading off in a different direction as she waved goodbye to Kimarya. Kimarya turned to the elder before describing a certain weapon she had in mind, hoping something similar exists in the storage. The elder smiled and nodded before leading the way. Kimarya and the elder, after 5 minutes of walking, reached their destination, and Kimarya smiled and said, "This is it, and it's better than I hoped." The elder shook his head and said, "The youth sure are different these days. Good luck, little one," and left. Kimarya only smiled and put her paper against the item before quickly stowing it away, absolutely pleased with her decision. Kimarya was among the last people to leave the building. Everyone congregated together near an open field. While she looked around trying to find Dara and Leerum, she suddenly froze in shock. Right above of everyone on the field floated over a dozen elders in the sky. The one who seemed to hold a more prominent position was the elder Shamaner, who was in the center with most people orbiting around paying attention to him. She suddenly felt her body lean to the side as a surprised Dara's hand narrowly missed Kimarya's shoulder that she just now tried to playfully tap in an attempt to surprise her. "Wow, you really do have amazing instincts. Are you sure you haven't started cultivating?" Kimarya smiled at the playful Dara before saying, "Not yet. I'm preparing to start soon." A gentle but resplendent voice interrupted. Kimarya recognized it as Shamaner's voice. "Little ones, you have all survived a very important coming-of-age tradition of our sect. I would like to once again congratulate all of you. You have maintained the honor of your houses and this sect," he continued. "Many of us elders have candidates in mind as to whom we are interested in accepting as a personal disciple, but the final challenge you must face will be what helps us make our final decision." Kimarya, for some reason, felt as if he was directing his words towards her, even though he was talking to the small crowd here. "For the last challenge, I first will have to explain a certain phenomenon of this world that happens in every epoch of this world. There is a moment that has happened once in every era, when this world merges with another dimension. We refer to it as the Veil Terminus era, or the Fall of the Veil. The Veil is an adjacent world with its own population of beings. In every era of this world, there comes a moment where both our worlds become one for some time, be it a few days or thousands of years before the veil comes up and we are separated once more." Shamaner continued, "This phase almost always devolves into a pandemonium of mass casualties, war, disease, and strife till a balance between all life is eked out." Many people in the small crowd had astounded and even terrified looks on their faces. A disciple shouted, "Will the sect be safe? What about smaller villages?" Dara whispered, "He used to be a vagabond cultivator that was accepted into our sect. He was a fox spirit that gained enlightenment from the Tao and transfigured into human form after cultivating before being adopted by a small village." Shamaner patiently responded, "As cultivators, we never shirk and hide from danger. You all know that wherever there is a challenge and difficulty, there are also treasures and opportunities. The falling of the veil inundates the world with energies that are extremely beneficial to cultivation. Many unique kinds of momentums are revealed to the world, materials, creatures, and phenomena that make these eras a golden age for cultivation. Almost all major sects were purposely built near special zones connecting to the veil, and in these sacred areas grow veil crystals." Shamaner explained further that these crystals are very special and allow an easier connection to the veil. These crystals become more pure and powerful the closer you get to the center, so everyone must try to reach their limit before selecting their crystal. These zones release a special and painful resonance that hampers the cultivation levels and strength of participants, so you would have to depend on your talent as well as fortitude. When you choose your crystal, there is an opportunity of catching a glimpse of your future. At the center lies the prime crystal embryo, the centermost crystal of this sacred ground. All the candidates should go as far as they can withstand and no further. It is recommended to be very aware of your limit, or you may rush to your doom. Now go, little ones. May your path in the Tao be eternal and profound." After he said this, multiple people rushed out in excitement to try and pick the best crystals or to compete with one another in who can reach the furthest depths of the field of glowing crystals. Almost immediately, multiple kids dashed forward with glowing auras surrounding them. Some even fully activated their ancestral spirit beast skill and turned into a wide array of large, lumbering animals. But shortly, those that transformed immediately reached their limit before they even reached 1/3 of the way to the center. Someone in a bird form that tried to fly to the center dropped like a stone, and when their ancestral beast form dissipated, it was a thin teenage boy with black hair and a long but thin nose, writhing in pain, as if being electrocuted by some mysterious energy. After he vomited 3 mouthfuls of blood, he moved no more. People finally realized that the warnings of the elder shamaneer weren't said lightly. It seemed like everyone stopped rushing towards the center and began to advance, and some even retreat as they realized where their limits were in this challenge. Kimarya saw Alistair and 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶 walking past the warm corpse of the kid who overestimated themselves. They walked at a measured yet fast pace. It seems they didn't make the mistake of everyone else and never rushed towards the center with their full strength. Alistair had a golden, regal aura wrapping around his body, his hair moving free from the burden of gravity because of his detonating energy. 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶 had a fierce, blood-red aura rampaging around him, as he only gazed forwards, seemingly no one getting into his sights. Alistair maintained his head high, basking in the attention of everyone else till he noticed someone walking behind both him and 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐶. Leerum! He walked with powerful and confident steps. Around him was his dark green aura, rippling around him like a thin shell of armor. There were bright azure spots flitting on the surface and a baleful aura of wildness pulsing from him. Kimarya heard her name being mentioned by Dara. "Be careful. You haven't yet cultivated, so don't push yourself too hard. Big sister is going to go ahead, okay?" She smiled, and a bright silver light was born from her spine and surrounded her. An aura of oppression and violence sprung out from her. A few of the stragglers immediately noticed her as she broke into a strong jog. "It's my turn, I guess." Kimarya stepped forward into the field of crystal outcrops and almost immediately felt a pressure weighing down all her limbs as if gravity immediately increased. She felt an uncomfortable sensation on her skin that seemed to invade deeper and deeper into her flesh. She trudged along, thinking she wouldn't be able to make it any distance with this bizarre sensation. As she continued, she no longer could pay attention to others in her surroundings. All she could focus on was not letting the weight of the sky crush her into the ground. Soon it felt like she was carrying another person as she started perspiring. The invasive feeling only grew worse into a dull pain as it pulled at her muscles, nerves as it sought to reach into her core. She could only shuffle forward, agonizing over every step as if she carried the weight of the entire world. The invasive feeling now felt like electric glass growing into her bones and nerves. She had to pinch her numb arms to make sure her blood wasn't turning into crystals. The pain was almost overwhelming. She heard a voice past her foggy eye as 2 people walked past her. "Activate your cultivation or you'll die before you make it to any decent crystals." "Idiot, can't you see that the dumbass doesn't even have a cultivation base? It's already amazing enough she's not dead. Girl, stop and choose an outer crystal before you die." That's right, Kimarya has yet to do any cultivation. Everyone else has been cultivating for several years already. She smirked and asked in her head, "Sunny status update?" "Sunny body status is 9% cell damage." She smiled and kept on one step at a time as the pain grew more agonizing. It felt like her skin was on fire, her bones ached. She was almost only 11 meters into the field, and it already felt like as if she had boiling water in her bones. Sunny body status is 19% cell damage. What percentage of cell damage is the upper limit where I'd be able to walk back from? Sunny, 36% of cell damage is the absolute most you can work with to ensure a safe return from this hazardous zone. Okay, I'll choose a crystal then. I noticed that my steps haven't gotten any heavier, so the weight I'm experiencing isn't physical weight or an increase in gravity, it's something else. She continued on in her impossible and torturous trek. Suddenly, she saw a flashing light right in front of her. She saw a bloody figure swaying unsteadily on their feet as they held onto a large outcrop of crystal. Green energy poured into his body. It looked like some mystical baptism of radiant green light before dimming. The boy yelled, "Elders, I have finished the trial. Please help me out of this field." No response. "Elders, I can't make it back out of the special zone, please." As Kimarya slowly walked past, the boy coughed up blood and his knees hit the floor. "Please," a voice spoke up at this moment. "It is forbidden for us to interfere in this process. Your fate lies within your hands. Please make every effort to return. You have only completed half of your final trial." He puked up blood right when he almost stood up. Kimarya could tell that if he didn't stand up again, he would not be able to make it back alive. It's still a question of him making it back even if he stood up. "Please, I already got the stupid crystal. Just help me out of here, please." No voices responded to him. Suddenly he felt an arm grab underneath his should, and he was awkwardly lifted to standing on his feet. It was Kimarya. "If I can help you walk and take you a few steps, do you think you can make it back?" The boy wiped off blood from his lips as his eyes spoke of how grateful he was. He caught his breath and let out a weak, "Yes." Sunny, 23% cell damage, Kimarya. She ignored Sunny and helped him a whole 3 meters till she felt a noticeable change of the pressure on her. "This should be good enough," gasped out Kimarya, as she was drenched in sweat and blood trickled down the side of her mouth. Sunny, 27% cell damage. The boy walked forward wheezing, spittle colored in blood painting the floor. "Thank you, senior sister." Kimarya, with an awful strained smile, walked forward once more. The trek was almost twice the effort it originally took. It didn't get any easier to return to the spot she was at. She stared straight ahead, looking at the cracked ground with crystals trying to escape from it. Each of the sparse outcrops of glowing green crystals. Some reached just the height of her thighs, others towering over her. She looked down at an outcrop near her feet. If she merely reached down, she could safely accomplish this challenge without risking her being stuck in a bed for months, crippled or even dying for overestimating herself. Sunny, 32% cell damage, Kimarya almost regretted helping that kid. She coughed out a mouthful of blood. She couldn't go on much longer. "I need to pick a crystal, even if it wasn't at the 36% target she originally had." She looked at multiple crystals in her area. She saw more people. Her fists clenched. She wanted to pass as many of them as possible. The disdain and derision weren't something she could easily forget. Making it further than some of them was the best way possible to smack their faces through her accomplishments. She also felt she was partly responsible to the previous occupant of this body whose memories she inherited, and still was digesting with the help of Sunny. Sunny, 32% cell damage. She took 9 steps before she fell to one knee. Her eyes were blurry, but she still saw a few heads turn to her. They sat cross-legged, still accepting the legacies of these crystals. She imagined there were faces with more derision or shock at how far she's come. Sunny, 34% cell damage, Kimarya. She felt nothing of her body besides the jarring feeling similar to electricity sloshing back and forth in waves through her bones. If it wasn't for this, she likely wouldn't have been able to walk this far with how numb her flesh was. She only got closer to a small group of people before falling to one knee. She didn't pass anyone, but she knew she wouldn't be able to stand up and walk much further. The sound of a snort made its way into her ears. At first, she was shocked that she could hear anything besides the blood pumping inside her head, and her heart laboring. This made her mad. Pulling at all the strength she had in her body, she tried to stand. Her legs suddenly gave out and she completely fell to the ground. Humiliation. She felt indignant. I only wanted to at least get close to this group, and at least show them that with no cultivation, she could do as much as them. She looked to her side, and there was a short and shiny green crystal within reach. Within reach was a way to end this challenge and her torture. She kept staring into the deep green crystal. Was it mocking her too? Her indignation only grew. She wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't accept this situation. Sunny, Kimarya, 34% cell damage. She couldn't accept this result. She only needed 10 more steps to reach those bastards laughing at her. Her body suddenly shook. The pressure on all of her skin, organs, bones, and cells immediately alleviated itself. As this pressure left, her chest grew incredibly warm. Her eyes grew clear. The crowded faces mocking her disappeared. She saw only one of them with a mocking smile. Others were mostly indifferent, and even a couple with worried looks. Weird? What's going on? The pain was gone. It felt like the air grew less heavy. The mind-numbing pain from this field of crystals was no longer debilitating. Sunny hazardous radiation isn't affecting you as much as before. Unknown bodily function was triggered. Duration of the effect is unknown. Kimarya shakily got to her feet. She wiped the blood from her under her eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. She walked forward. The air and her body still resisted, but it was nowhere as difficult or as painful as before. 10 steps. She stopped next to the fellow that was the source of the snort and derision. She said, "Thank you, I probably would have given up were it not for your kind encouragement." There was a mocking smile on her face. She ignored the rest and made eye contact with the two who were worried about her, and gave a small nod of her head before continuing forward, moving between towering crystal outcrops. She found a couple of people in meditative stances too busy incorporating their crystals to notice her. She later saw a corpse, and her breath was stuck in her throat. She looked towards his face, and it wasn't anyone she knew. Sunny, 34.7% cell damage. She turned another corner and saw a very bloody Dara in a corner with a radiant smile on her face as she had her hand pressed against a crystal, her eyes closed. Her heart grew warm at seeing that she was mostly okay and that she made it this far. She was going to continue and not distract her till she opened her eyes and shock immediately painted itself on her face. Kimarya, you need to get back from here. The pressure from this will kill you. Wait, how did you even make it this far? I almost died getting here. She glanced at the blood on Kimarya's body and sleeve. You aren't okay, but you shouldn't be this casual, so deep into this. Kimarya responded, I don't know what happened. I reached my limit earlier and suddenly all the pain and pressure fell off of my body. It's still hard, as if I'm walking under a waterfall, but it's manageable. Dara mumbled to herself, then asked, Your chest, does it have something to do with your chest? My what? Kimarya lifted her shirt and saw underneath her skin a green circle was glowing. There's a glowing circle at the center of my chest under my skin that's glowing. Dara responded, That's it! You somehow activated your heart spirit. You don't have too long, especially if this is your first time. If you go further, Leerum shouldn't be too far, and he'd help you go back safely. Kimarya nodded her head and sped up her pace. She walked 23 more steps in a winding path between crystals, and before she saw 4 silhouettes up ahead, one being Leerum. As soon as she turned the corner, all 3 turned around. Shock immediately showed itself on Leerum's face. The other 3 frowned. How did this trash make it this far? Don't tell me her parents are helping her cheat. It would make sense, considering she not only lived through the first trial, but even got the trashy ape with no cultivation. What treasure are you using to make it this far? If you let me reach the Nexus, I can overlook your cheating and not report it to the elders. Kimarya, go back. It's not safe over here, Leerum whispered. Kimarya looked closely at Leerum and saw blood leaking from his lips. He looks exhausted. She also looked at the other 3, who looked equally haggard as Leerum. She looked ahead and saw a red haze in front of the 4 people. Alistair roared, How dare you ignore me! Hand over the treasure and I won't report this to the elders. 𝐃𝐢𝐯𝐞 snorted and looked at him with disdain. Leerum flinched but moved to get between Alistair and Kimarya before he said, You need to go. Whatever item you are using, he might take it and you'll die from the pressure of this area. Pick a crystal and go. 𝐃𝐢𝐯 snorted once more and turned away before selecting an especially bright crystal on the outskirts of the red haze in the center of this treacherous domain. The other 2 people looked at her, blood running from their eyes, making them look terrifying. She could see the temptation in their eyes before they glanced at Leerum. She frowned and said, All right, I'll hand it to you. Alistair was surprised and smirked toward Leerum. Nice try, worm, she knows better. He continued, Girl, I'll help you get a good crystal for making the right choice. Heh. She walked towards Alistair. She saw the 2 people with Alistair and Leerum glance at each other, then shook their heads after both looking at Alistair before choosing crystals of their own nearby. They weren't able to endure this pressure, knowing they couldn't take the treasure. She knew it. They would try nothing against the overwhelming Alistair. Leerum frowned with a confused look on his face, but he got out of Kimarya's way. Looking at him as she passed, she winked. His face paled, and before he could get out a word, he coughed up a mouthful of blood. She stopped and told him to choose a crystal before walking in front of Alistair and handing him something. He smugly smiled before rage filled his face. He looked up but saw that Kimarya had already dashed into the red haze. He still didn't take one step forward, even though he was fuming with rage as he threw the dirty stone in his hand to the ground. He wasn't an idiot with a death wish. He wouldn't dare follow her into that. Leerum, who looked back right at that moment as he touched a crystal, shouted, Kimarya, no! Immediately after she saw all white, she screamed so hard her vocal cords might have even torn. Every part of her consumed her consciousness with unimaginable pain. Dreadful pain, she couldn't even escape to unconsciousness to escape from it. She writhed on the floor, making guttural screams. Sunny 56% cell damage. Kimarya, get back out of this, Sasquatch said. Let this great one help you with smacking some faces. Light shone and covered Kimarya from head to toe. Kimarya's eyes, wet with blood, could see. She once again had control of her body. She knew her clothes were drenched with blood. She was just now uncontrollably vomiting blood till now. Sasquatch interrupted her. This magnificent one can't maintain this transformation for long. Get the crystal. She woke up from her daze and with long strides reached the crystal. It was tiny and blood red. As she touched the crystal, everything went dark. Kimarya opened her eyes. She was in a city of stone and wood, smelled the saltiness of the ocean in the cool breeze on her face. She tried to turn her head in confusion to the scenery change, but found that she had no control of her body, as if she was an observer stuck in her own head. Kimarya stood between pillars, reaching towards the sky, holding up a wooden roof. There were no walls. She saw she was high up. It seemed to be some sort of ancient temple up on a hill. She thought to herself, is this the vision the great elder shammaner mentioned? Her body moved on its own. She even heard her own voice in her head talking to Sunny about this temple. This was a very bizarre feeling, very different from when Sunny or Sasquatch take over her body. When moments like those have happened, she could always feel deep down that she could override them if she truly needed to. She kept gazing out at this temple. She saw many hieroglyphic-like inscriptions on the floor and crawling up the massive columns. Kimarya could feel Sunny answering affirmatively to the Kimarya of this vision and scanning them. She wondered if she could communicate with them. She started yelling in her head, "Sunny, me Kimarya, Sasquatch, can any of you hear me?" Trying this over and over, but her vision self and Sunny continued doing what they were doing, completely oblivious to her many attempts. Suddenly she heard a snoring sound louder than Kimarya's and Sunny. The snoring sound suddenly stopped. How odd. You're Kimarya, yet you aren't my Kimarya. What is going on? I thought I felt someone new in this occupied head. Please explain to this great and powerful and oh so magnificent one what seems to happening right now. Kimarya, both surprised and elated, said, Sasquatch, I was just in the Veilstone selection, and I touched the centermost crystal, and I'm in a vision right now. Why am I being shown this? Can they hear you responding to me? Sasquatch responded, this great one already knew this, just testing you. This magnificent and omnipotent one knows everything. No, this great one had to make some efforts to respond to you. When Kimarya heard this, she wanted to facepalm so hard, but ultimately couldn't. Stop playing around. Please communicate with myself, and have her help her past self. Suddenly, she felt the most dreadful feeling of danger she has ever experienced, something that was completely incomparable to the hyena and murder crow. It felt like every single one of her cells was screaming. She felt as if she was utterly insignificant. Like she was less than even an ant before some dreadful colossus looming above that seemed to push some dreadful formless pressure against her and trying to pulverize her. She felt completely and utterly trapped. Sunny, run now! Dreadful existence! Less than 0.0009% chance of survival. Sasquatch shouted in her head in a voice so booming and more agitated than she ever heard him. Get out! Turn around, and whatever you do, don't look at it. It was too late. When someone tells you not to look at something, especially in a stressful situation, few people can be so disciplined to gain control of their body within less than a split second of your brain interpreting a message telling you to not look at something dangerous. Her chin moved up. Her glazed eyes finally focused past the massive city below. Then past the city was the crimson sea mirroring the equally red and orange skies painted by the sunset. Except she saw a massive blotch in her vision. She at first thought it was a smudge on her eyeball, maybe a hair or particle getting stuck in her eye. She thought maybe a cloud or even a mountain range rising from the sea before she finally realized that it was a creature so massive her eyes were incapable of totally encompassing its entirety, incapable of recognizing it as a living being. How could something so massive exist? It clicked in her head at that second. Her brain whirred into complete awakeness as the shapes made sense. It was a colossal body with what appeared to be two massive appendages at its front. Appendages appearing to be scythe-like arms whose sharpness even pricked her eyes when she stared directly at them. Each arm-like appendage appeared to be big enough to dwarf an aircraft carrier, its massive body behind it pushed forward as if trying to tear the ocean in half. Its forward momentum creating massive waves in its wake. Its upper body pushed forward out of the sea, and what appeared to be 6 colossal legs that could shoulder the skies, and a seemingly infinitely long underbody shaking the ocean and threatening the skies as it broke the surface of the seas. Kimarya heard Sasquatch shout, "Get out now, or you won't have a chance to escape it!" Kimarya felt this moment to be the most dangerous moment of her life. She heard herself respond to Sasquatch that she still couldn't understand how a gigantic and slow creature, more than 300 miles away, would warrant her need to escape at this moment. "It will be on top of this peninsula in less than 2 minutes, so you need to move right now. It's faster than its size would make you think." She looked back at the monstrous fiend, and somehow it seemed to be much bigger and closer than she thought just a moment ago. Sunny and Sasquatch simultaneously shouted, "Run!" Kimarya's body ignited with energy rampaging from within her core. Blasts of air assaulted the area around her as her hair rose up. She pressed the red button on her wrist, and from within her ring of storage shot out a golden box that sprang open towards her, and its contents connected to her light armor and fully encompassed her. 4 long metallic appendages formed on her back, the back 2 slightly longer and more sturdy than the front pair. What caught Kimarya's eye as she observed her vision self do all of this was when a computer chip came out magically from her chest and flew to the back of this golden suit and landed on the protective spinal area of this suit. Fight or flight mode activated, Kimarya turned and dived off the side of the temple, the exact opposite side of the monster. She did this with zero hesitation regardless of the city looming hundreds of feet over where she was, as her tactical suit transformed into a sleek wingsuit as the appendages retracted. She could hear herself mutter, "My cultivation doesn't yet allow me to fly, but I prepared this suit for the meantime. Stutter step isn't quite as effective on the ocean or quick in this environment." She glided around spires. She saw people stunned by the pressure emanating from the monster as she screamed, "There's a monster coming! Run!" She didn't look back. She knew she would barely be able to escape herself, let alone save others. Kimarya was quickly seeing the edge of the city before Sasquatch said, "Escape towards the sea, the land route is closer to it, just go straight into the ocean." She altered her direction slightly, seeking to directly fly off the side of the city and into the ocean. Kimarya muttered, "It's been like 2 minutes, is it really here?" She made the mistake of turning her head to the side and felt her heart skip a beat as she saw its colossal form towering over not just the town, but even the gigantic temple overlooking the city. It stopped, and she finally saw that the surrounding haze around it was millions of tiny tentacles moving all over. She saw powerful cultivators shouting as they flew up to it and immediately get impaled by these vicious tentacles. There was no chance of resistance. It was as if they were less than flies to it as it ignored them as the gigantic head looked down directly at the temple. A voice rolled out like a wave from this monster, a voice that sounded totally inhuman and colder than any she could even imagine. "Lesser beings cherish the honor to be consumed by me. Die!" The tentacles grew still for a second before they impaled all of the cultivators high in the sky and made their way to the city. At that moment, Kimarya finally flitted over the edge off of the peninsula and towards the water below. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure it would explode. She crashed into the water, adapting to aquatic escape mode, mimicking the most efficient form for this environment. The wingsuit reassembled itself around her. The tough and spiky edges retracted to a smooth surface where water would not come in as she resurfaced. Oxygen was pulled inside of the 2 vacuums on her side. The form lengthened and resembled a sleek teardrop shape. The materials in front of her head grew pointed, and further behind her legs a fish-like tail was formed. Above her body rose a blue-black dorsal fin. The suit changed color as its form resembled a marlin. The form punched through the water as the body undulated in the sea. Its powerful tail went back and forth incredibly fast. She looked back again and saw tens of thousands of others dive off the cliff. Hundreds flew up into the sky. Resistance or fighting was impossible, so they tried to escape. Tentacles followed behind each of them. She even saw one coming directly for her, who was way ahead of many. She dived further and pushed as much of her energy as possible into her suit to maximize its full output as her speed tripled. Yet even as she increased her speed more and more, she could still feel the tentacle locked onto her, rapidly following behind her. Those that tried to escape by flying were swiftly taken out by the tentacles in the air. They were quickly punctured through. Those were the ones with weak cultivations, whereas those stronger and with much faster flying speed barely escaped into the horizon, carrying 1 or 2 loved ones or their disciples. Others that tried to swim like her seemed to have had better odds in the water, but ultimately the drag of the water slowed them down where the tentacle finally caught up and grabbed them. As she swam, She saw as if all the fish and sea life in the ocean, just millions of them, were frantically escaping in the same direction as her as she passed them. The roaring of the water couldn't drown out their frantic sounds, or even of the people as they screamed in panic. She utilized her full cultivation, pushing to her absolute limits, swam around those in front of her. She even weaved between massive fish in the area that were trying their hardest to escape the horde of tentacles. Predators and prey alike fled, ignoring instincts as they fled a threat much bigger than the fears written into their blood by their ancestors. They all fled like one, an unending tide. Kimarya saw her vision self looking from side to side, confused as to what she was looking for in such a dire moment when all she needed to do was flee as fast as possible. She jerked her head in the direction of a speeding blur, rampaging and smashing aside all the fish and people as it propelled through everything. Its speed was incredible as it cleaved through the water. It was the ancient corpse shark, the deadliest and most feared creature on these shores. Only blood followed as it rampaged through all things in its way. Kimarya's eyes shined as she moved towards it. A vicious hook was being formed on the side of the suit. She understood immediately what her plan was. Her future self planned to attach herself to the shark and escape with it. Kimarya swam between both large and small creatures as she made its way to the area it would soon pass through and was ready. As it came up below her, she shot the hook towards its rotting dorsal fin before it immediately caught on and immediately pulled her along. Spikes formed on her underside as the insane water resistance pushed her against its body. The hooks sunk in and the marlin form immediately flattened out and sunk more and more hooks into its body to secure itself to its body. Her surroundings, blurred by the speed of this corpse shark, was truly unbelievable as it fled in distress, using all of its fearsome might to get away from the monstrous existence back at the town, reaping all the lives of all living beings. Sunny chance of escape, 90%. Kimarya responded, "I think we will finally be able to get away." Sasquatch interrupted, "Just to let you know, we have company. Apparently the past version of yourself witnessed all of this as a vision." Kimarya started to feel the vision begin to weaken and grow light. She quickly shouted, "Ask her about the microchip. Have Sunny give me the data to make it. The vision is ending."